Our whole universe was.
Hi everybody, in this video we're gonna show you the magic word of chemistry. First of all, I'm gonna present you my group. My name is Juan Martín Dussan. Here it is Juan Ernesto Cruz. Here we have Juan Esteban Perez. There we have Sara Niño. Here it is Juan Vargas, and there is Alfredo Castellanos. What we're gonna do? Well, the first experiment is pretty easy, pretty simple. We have here three beakers, kind of beakers. One blue, one red, and one yellow. We're gonna have this pretty cool, this one pretty hot, and this one middle point, you know.
Well, here is the explanation of the experiment number 1. This procedure consists in determining the effect of the reaction with different temperatures. The first thing we are going to do is take 3 beakers and add 200 milliliters of water at each at different temperature, one hot, another warm, and another cold. Then we are going to add a little dye to each of the beakers to be able to differentiate them. Blue for the cold water, yellow for the warm water, and red for the hot water. After this, we have to add at the same time an effervescent aspirin to each of the vessels. Measure the time with the timer from when we add the aspirin until the end of the reaction.
The second experiment consists in changing the volume of each beaker in order to watch the different reactions. We need 3 beakers, water, 3 dyes of different color. In this case we used yellow, blue and red, and an effervescent aspirin, also a stopwatch. The first step is to add 200 milliliters of water to the first beaker, 100 milliliters to the second one, and 50 milliliters to the third one. In our experiment, the maximum volume of the beaker was of 100 milliliters, so we used 150 and 25 milliliters of water instead of 200, 100, and 50 milliliters. We add dye to each one. We add blue to the first one, yellow to the second, and red to the third. Then add the aspirin to each beaker. Watch the reaction and finally record the times of each one.
Si es mayor, es bueno.
Well, now I'm gonna explain the experiment number 3. We're gonna take 2 beakers and add them 200 milliliters of water. Then we're gonna add a little dye of color to differentiate them. After this, we're gonna add at the same time an effervescent aspirin to one of the beaker, and the other we're gonna add effervescent aspirin in powder. We use to powder the aspirin, we use a mortar and a pestle. Then we're gonna measure the time with the timer from the time you add the aspirin until the end of the reaction. Well, while we're doing this, we're also gonna write the results to then have the conclusions. To finally have the conclusions, sorry. That's what we're gonna do in the third experiment.
Experiment number 4. We will find a procedure to determine the effect of the reaction with different quantity of aspirin and vinegar. The materials we will be using for this experiment are 3 beakers, water, blue, yellow, and red dye, effervescent aspirin, and a stopwatch, vinegar, and Lua fruit salt. The procedure for this experiment is the next one. First, we take the 3 beakers and add 200 milliliters of water in each one. Then, we add some blue dye to one of the beakers, yellow dye to another one, and red dye to the last one, in order to differentiate them from each other. Then, we add 2 effervescent aspirins to one of the beakers, and then just 1 effervescent aspirin in the other 2. Measure the time with a stopwatch from the moment the aspirin has been added to the beaker till the end of the reaction. Finally, write down conclusions and results about the experiment.
So, here we are gonna explain the second part of the experiment number 4, the part B. We use the same materials as the part A. So here we take 2 beakers. The first one, we add 200 milliliters of vinegar, and the second one, a mixture of 50 milliliters of vinegar and 150 milliliters of water at the same time, and we involve of lua fruit salt. Then we observe what happens and take the time to explain like conclusions and things like that.
Hey, un saludito para todos los fans.
Well, now I'm going to explain the experiment number 5. That is procedure to determine the effect of the reaction of the hydrogen mixed with a liquid soap. The materials that we use are hydrogen peroxide, 1 beaker, 1 test tube, a liquid soap, potassium iodide spatula. And the steps that we follow are: take 50 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide and add it to a beaker. Then transfer it to a 250 milliliter test tube. After that, observe the evolution of the oxygen. Follow it at 10 milliliter of liquid soap and shake it to homogenize the mixture. Finally, add a little with help of a potassium iodide spatula, and then observe and make our conclusions.
Okay, the security requirements are a lab coat, some chirurgical gloves, and some goggles, and another application is that you can eat inside the lab.
Well, now I'm going to talk about our conclusion and results. In the first experiment, we can conclude that the temperature affects the reaction in an inverse way with respect of the time, because while the temperature increases, the time decreases. In the experiment number 2, we get in the conclusion that the volume of the beaker, the quantity of water that we use in each beaker, it's not so relevant in the change of the time of the reaction, because we put the same quantities of aspirin with different volumes of water, but they end the reaction in a similar time. In the experiment number 3, we can observe and conclude that the beaker with water with the powder aspirin ends the reaction faster than the beaker with water with the solid aspirin. Well, in the part A of the experiment number 4, we can conclude that the difference were not so visible to our eyes, and the quantities of aspirin that we use in each beaker with the same quantity of water, it's not so relevant in the velocity of the reaction. In the part B of the experiment number 4, we can conclude that pure vinegar accelerates the reaction against the mixture between vinegar and water, because the difference between the time of both mixtures is so significant.